I had a friend at the time who had a lot more patients than clients, whatever we were calling them back then, who he could handle. And so I started out in this practice. And what I did was, I remember saying to myself was, I'm just like going to remove myself from the whole professional community. I mean, withdraw. I mean, I was literally, like I say, embarrassed to be associated. I would go, people who knew me at the time, when people would ask me what I did socially, you know, I wouldn't even, I feel embarrassed saying I was a psychologist, because I figured anybody with a half a brain would know, like, that's a weird profession, you know? And thank God I wasn't a psychiatrist. That would have been, I don't know what I would have done. I would have, like, you know, but they both believe in the DSM, and they both really teach this pathologizing, and they teach this kind of techniques, how to manipulate people kind of stuff, and there are different ways, okay? And so, you know, I go off in private practice, and this becomes hugely fun for me, because basically I do everything opposite of what I was taught in school, which is, instead of trying to manipulate and control people, just be as honest as you can with folks and be as respectful. Nice. And, it was lots of fun, because I heard about lots of my colleagues, they were burning out, and I remember going like, I'm not burning out. Why are you burning out? Because when you try to control people all the time, you burn out. People don't like to get controlled. That was pretty obvious. But lots of interesting things happened when I was in my withdrawal from the world here of just doing private practice. I started to really think about a lot of the clientele that I saw. I saw a lot of young people, teenagers with boys with single mom who had been diagnosed by previous shrinks as oppositional defiant disorder and all these so-called disruptive disorders. And it was really interesting to me. I'd been told by their parents and told by the notes from previous doctors about how they're difficult to deal with and all that. And it was amazingly easy to deal with all these previously diagnosed ODD kids. All you had to do was legitimize, validate that it was okay to question authority. That was it. And once you did that, you could form a relationship. And then you could talk about the idea that you may want to question and challenge your mom differently than a Cincinnati policeman, you know? And they were open to that. And it was easy to do, counseling. And the other interesting thing, I developed a more positive view of parents and family in general, because these poor parents had taken these kids to see previous shrinks, and most of them would come and see me, whether they were took me to somebody who was just drugging them, medical management stuff, or even the typical cognitive therapies. They weren't talking to the parents, these people. So these parents felt completely out of the loop, and I always talked to parents, because for me, I had to develop a rapport, a relationship with them, because I knew I was going to be doing some things that might look inappropriate, but there was a reason behind it, okay? And so you have to develop a relationship with parents. And the interesting thing for me was I knew that a lot of my colleagues were afraid to kind of confront people all over the place, because they were afraid of not getting an A from a prof, afraid of losing a customer, patient. But I realized that most of these parents, that they were welcoming, hungering for, what am I doing here that my kid's not respecting me? Tell me that, Bruce. They were looking for that. Not all. There were a couple who fired me. But that was very unusual. All right? And so I was doing this. And the other interesting thing that started to happen is I saw other kinds of clientele as well, besides these rebellious kids. I saw substance abusers, a lot of substance abusers, a lot of folks who really genuinely wanted to stop their alcohol abuse, but weren't crazy about 12-step, AA, for a lot of reasons. Maybe they didn't like the whole hierarchy or something, higher power, there was something they didn't like about it. And I saw a lot of depressed people, and I saw a few people who had been previously diagnosed as schizophrenic, paranoid schiz, not a lot of folks. But the interesting thing for me was that the common denominator, almost all these people who I saw, was a kind of anti-authoritarianism. That these were people completely different than my peers and professors who I went to school with, who were much more comfortable questioning authority. Some of these folks were very gentle, sweet, and you had to draw it out, but it was going on inside. Some of these people, it was right out there, that they were completely comfortable with friction. And so I saw this big split between those who I'd gone in training with, those and the actual people that they would be seeing, and this stuck in my head. Anyways, I stayed withdrawn from the whole public sphere till around 1994, okay? So I'm in private practice from 85 to 94, and I've got no need to be like public and do this kind of stuff and write books and all that. But in 1994, weird things sort of happened that lead you certain places that you don't know. And one day in my waiting room, I had this Utne magazine. I don't know if so many people know what it is. And it advertised itself as the best alternative reader. I thought that was a kind of cool thing to have in my waiting room. And I've got a break, and I'm looking through the new Utne. And I see there's this article in it called ADD, Not Just for Kids Anymore. And it was about adult ADD. And again, it was not activism here that motivated me. I just was pissed off. I had bought this alternative thing, and they had this article in here that could have been in Newsweek or anywhere else. And so I said, I'm writing a letter to the editor here. So I did. I should tell you, by the way, anybody who wants to end up writing books and do this kind of stuff, it's a good place to start, writing letters to the editor and things like that. And so they printed it. They printed most of it. They censored a little bit, but they printed most of it. And I talked about like the idea, things like, isn't it possible that kids, a lot of these kids who you're diagnosing with ADHD just were in boring schools, and maybe this adult ADD has to do not with biochemistry stuff, and everybody doesn't need speed out there, but that more like it's about, look at our workplace in America. There's no more interesting family farmer jobs anymore. More and more people are working as telemarketers and cashiers and clerks. This is Department of Labor statistics, by the way. And so I said, maybe that is happening. So there's a kind of brief letter, and I wrote about that. I didn't think anything of it, but then I started getting a couple of phone calls. And the first phone call was the guy who wrote the article. And he left this message with my answering service, like he scared my answering service, he frightened them. And they said, this guy sounded like he was on speed, Bruce. I've been working over 25 years in private practice. I've never had my answering service actually been scared by any patient, but that was the one time. They were worried about it. Then I got another phone call. And and it turned out I initially almost hung up because I thought, like, I'm going to go back in my cave. I don't want to deal with this stuff. But the second call was from a friend of mine now and a friend that I know many people here, from David Oakes. And David said, Bruce, there are other dissident psychologists in America. Did you know that? And I never heard that term, dissident psychology. Actually, I kind of liked that. I immediately thought to myself, that's less embarrassing to say at a party than I'm a psychologist. So he hooked me on the phone call. I didn't hang up on him. And then he talked to me about psychiatric survivors. And I never heard that term up until 1994. I was very interested in all this. And so Mr. Organizer David, the Saul Alinsky of the mental health movement, he ended up hooking me up with folks. And he told me about a lot of folks I ended up becoming friends with, the late Kevin McReady, who's a dissident psychologist, and Ty Colbert he mentioned. And then eventually I head off to I joined this ICSPP, this International Center for Study of Psychiatry and Psychology, which is professional kind of dissident psychiatrists, psychologists, social worker organization. And
excuse me, could you repeat what that organization is?
Well, they changed their name. The little political problems there. So it was once called ICSPP. I'm not like the acronym now. I think it's the International Society for Ethical Psychology and Psychiatry, something like that. I think that's the new name now.
What was it originally?
What?
Can you say both the original name and
the original name was International Center for the Study of Psychiatry and Psychology, and the name changed, I think, to the the International Society for Ethical Psychiatry and Psychology. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take
Peter Bregan's group is empathetic psychiatry, and he's the founder.
Okay, this is some political things here that I don't want to get into here about what happened there, but anyways, so I joined that, and I go to the first meeting, first couple of meetings. They were in Washington, D.C. I go there, and all of a sudden I enter this room with mental health professionals, who are psychiatrists, psychologists, who were like, oh my God, these guys are completely opposite of the folks that I went to school with. I mean.